Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this LinkedIn live session. My name is Conor. I am a managing consultant at Harnham. For anyone who's listening who hasn't come across Harnham or doesn't know us, we're basically the UK's largest data and analytics specific recruitment agency. So data and analytics recruitment across the board. My role more specifically within that is to lead and manage the credit and risk analytics recruitment team. So basically any data or analytically based roles that focuses on lending, credit, financial services, that space in general. And I'm joined here by Mary Agbesanwa. Thanks a million for joining us, Mary. If you want to maybe just introduce yourself to everyone who's listening.
Sure thing. Thank you so much, Conor, and hi everyone. Hope you are safe and well, and happy Thursday. I'm really excited to have this conversation and talk a bit about FinTech and diversity and Gen Z and millennials with you all. So yeah, really excited. As a short introduction to myself, as you mentioned, my name is Mary Agbesanwa. I'm super passionate about how technology is changing the world of financial services and particularly supporting millennials, particularly female millennials, to achieve their full potential. So my day job is I work as a management consultant also at PwC, initially in our operations team, so working with banks and now fintechs around operational change programs. And I ran our latest scale fintech accelerator program, so working with really interesting and innovative B2B fintechs. I also co-lead our firm's Multicultural business network, so really passionate about talking about diversity in terms of diversity of thought and background and what that really means and how that intersects with financial services as well. And outside of work, I also am a careers blogger. So I talk about navigating the corporate world and careers for particularly young people, and run a kind of entrepreneurial community, networking community called the Now Talking Network for female millennials and Gen Z. So lots there for us to unpack. I'm really looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, well, so some exciting stuff going on there and plenty for us to talk about. Obviously, a lot of my client base would be the big banks as well, to be fair, but fintechs and the challengers, and that's where a lot of some of the kind of exciting stuff is happening, even in my own role. I always imagine the last 12 months, it must have been difficult for a lot of fintechs. Not a lot of people spending. Most of these companies kind of aren't profitable as well. So I imagine it's a good time to be offering these types of services to some of these up and coming fintechs. Can you maybe talk through some of the interesting stuff that you're seeing in that space?
Yeah, sure thing. So in terms of what I'm seeing, I definitely think I resonate with what you say around it being a unique time to be in fintech. And I think in some ways the pandemic has really kind of shocked everyone. So people are open to those ideas around collaboration, partnership, and innovation. So that's been a good kind of side effects of the pandemic as well. But in terms of the work that we're doing in relation to fintech, so we do a number of things. So we work with some external organizations and communities like FinTech Alliance, Innovate Finance. We also signed the FinTech for All Charter, which is really about addressing diversity in financial services through a data-driven approach. We produce a lot of thought leadership. So we just released a FinTech Deals in Focus paper, a FinTech Payments report, and we have a global FinTech report that we released not too long ago as well as the accelerator I run. So I think it's a really interesting space, really thinking about and recognizing the future of financial services. Banking will be around partnering together and offering the best services to innovate for the customer, essentially. So lots happening in that respect.
Yeah, that's some awesome stuff there. Just by the way, for anyone who is listening, you should be able to ask your own questions, I think down the bottom right or down the bottom of the screen there. So feel free if you want Mary or myself to expand on anything that we're discussing here, or if you think of any interesting questions that are worth bringing up, feel free to pop them down there, and we'll try cover off as many of those as possible. Maybe not straight away, but as we go and when we get a chance. And I know, Mary, you spoke there about kind of diversity and inclusion and stuff like that. And definitely we'll come to that in a little bit, I think. But when we look at like specific trends within the fintech space, and I suppose any new innovations and adaptations that we're seeing from some of these businesses, is there any main trends that you see as kind of maybe the main things to look out for over the next 12, 18, 24 months and beyond?
Fantastic question. I think there's a lot happening in the space. I always say, so in the year 2020, last year, over $40 billion was invested into fintech worldwide, which is crazy, and second only to health tech in a year where we had a pandemic. So I think we can definitely expect loads more innovation to happen in the space. And I think now technology's enabled fintechs to start with even lower startup costs. So the rise of kind of APIs, which basically help kind of easier integration and lower startup costs for businesses generally, mean that I can expect us to see even more fintechs innovating. And additionally, I think from a UK specific perspective, there was the recent Khalifa strategic review, which really focused on fintech being a kind of strategic sector for focus for the UK post-Brexit, post the kind of COVID-19 economic recovery. So I think more investment, more focus really means more innovation as well. But in terms of particular trends, I think everyone kind of jokes now that and quotes that Andreessen Horowitz quote that says every company will be a fintech company. And I think that is kind of true, that I think we've seen the likes of like the bigger tech companies like Amazon offer fintech products, so everything from kind of payments to insurance and maybe credit cards as well. So I think that's definitely a trend that we're seeing more, and it's almost thinking about how can you make that process more seamless and integrated for customers so they don't have to use other kind of third-party providers as well. I think other areas of interest are definitely ESG, so environmental social governance, and what this means in terms of purpose-driven banking, or sometimes people call it fintech for good. So I'm really excited about applications of that in relation to kind of supporting people around the education side, so financial literacy, and how that's being done through kind of like gamification or social fintech, and being able to share kind of ideas with your friends, and maybe the impact investing side as well, being able to put money in companies that you really believe in that are doing good things as well. So that's definitely a trend as well. But I think on the whole, there is this now, especially with the whole kind of GameStop saga, this whole idea of like the democratization of financial services through technology. So whether that's through kind of crowdfunding and being able to start businesses through kind of asking your kind of friends and family and supporters to give you money, or through being able to buy like fractional shares with literally £10 or £5 or however much money you have. I think there's the idea that financial services and certain products and services don't need to exist for only a certain portion of the population anymore is really interesting as well. And then from an enterprise perspective, I would say, especially given the pandemic, anything relating to kind of cost reduction, and that can help larger organizations with cost reduction, as well as kind of utilizing all the data that they have available. So obviously these larger financial institutions have kind of these legacy IT platforms. How can fintech enable them to integrate with newer technology, offer newer kind of services or tools for their customers as well? So I think there's a lot happening, definitely exciting space that I think more people should look into as well.
Yeah, exactly. You touched on so many interesting points there. I think like in the banking sector in general, it's so regulated, it's kind of old school, and innovations were happening for so many years in all different industries, but there was nearly like a wall around the banking industry, as in it was just, the old school kind of status quo, and there really hadn't been much innovations there when we look at how technology could, help make better products for our customers. And now it seems like it's all just the momentum is there. It's all like happening at once over a couple of years. So it's a super, super exciting space to be, I'm sure, a part of and working in. And you mentioned that the fact that $40 billion invested in the fintech space. Funnily enough, obviously, I recruit for these businesses and for big banks. And last year, like through the pandemic, it wasn't the big banks who were hiring. Most of the big banks actually had higher freezes. It was the well-funded businesses, the growth companies, the startups who were actually the one who were growing out their teams because they needed to. So it's interesting to see, and maybe counterintuitive, because you think that over the last 12 months, these fintechs were kind of had the shutters down and everything was on hold. But actually, if they're well funded and if they're making the right decisions, which you're there to help them do, a lot of them have actually been growing, as well as focusing on cutting costs and becoming more lean and efficient with their business models. So you'd think now, with things opening up, that it could be, I'm sure the ones who have survived throughout that will be really looking forward to hopefully thriving over the next 12 months or so.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I suppose just moving on from that, I know you're very big on millennials in the workforce, career development, kind of Gen Z and this type of stuff. What do you think adorns that generation and young people to the fintech sector so much? I mean, every one of my friends has if they don't have a Monzo, they've got a Revolut, or they've got, they're investing in whether Robinhood, probably not here in the UK, but kind of similar ideas about using new technologies and apps and features to access financial services. Why do you think that is?
Again, another brilliant question. I think it is really what you just mentioned there, that now fintech is more accessible than ever. The rise of kind of technology, the fact that we can have apps that enable us to invest, to save, kind of do mobile and online banking really helps as well. So I think fintech definitely has driven a lot of the accessibility that we see to date. I also think now what I like about fintech, as maybe opposed to traditional financial services, is how it's driving financial services to be easier to understand. So I always say, if you look at the language used by like a Starling, a Monzo, or a Revolut compared to your traditional financial services company, it's really different. They're trying to make financial services less jargon heavy. And this has really opened up the sector for people to really, even maybe when they're less knowingly, have accessibility to play around with things. So I definitely think there's more that could be done around the education side, but I think it is really exciting that people now have the options to maybe spend some money on some, I don't know, digital currencies, or invest in the stock market, and really what that means in terms of enabling people to have access to financial services. I think that's really exciting as well. And I think I'm really excited about how technology is enabling people to build good financial habits as well. And I think we have to be honest, like being a Gen Z or a millennial right now is difficult. Like people talk about generation rent and the fact that people can't afford like houses, that they have to take up side hustles. Like I always say, like 1 in 4 adults in the UK has a side hustle, which is crazy because that means maybe that their day job isn't providing sufficient income and things like that. But I think there is this growing appetite to recognize, actually, I just need more money. And I see a lot of Gen Zs in particular normalizing that conversation about finances generally. So there's definitely a rise in kind of finfluencers, is what they're called, like financial services influencers, and people talking about how technology enables you to kind of build income. And a lot of these fintechs that are more kind of consumer focused really enable that to happen quite easily. So whether it's kind of like automation through like using services such as if you buy a coffee for £3.50, they'll round that up to £4, and 50% of 50p of that goes into the stock market. Things like that really make financial services more integrated into your day-to-day life and less complicated, because you almost don't need to think about it. Before you know it, 10 coffees later and you've saved up however much money that could eventually kind of bring you some return. So I really like how it's become more accessible, easier to understand, and there are definitely pros and cons to that, but it definitely is an exciting time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you mentioned there briefly as well was education. And I think what I like about a lot of these fintechs is they're not just providing the service, but they're actually trying to educate people on whether it be, the importance of savings or tracking their costs, or I always think like it's crazy that we go to school, everyone learns about geography and convection currents and all sorts, but we don't really learn anything about how to manage our own finances, which is something that we all need to learn, and a skill that everyone would ultimately benefit from. But I just want to ask a question here from, I think we've had a couple come in from our audience. So this one is from, excuse me, I'm going to get this name wrong. I think it's Muthu. He or she was asking, how is fintech innovation addressing the growing consumer awareness in the ESG space, things like environmental impact and related investments? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you for your question. I would say that it's definitely a more nascent space, but I know a lot of fintechs, particularly looking at this, have received investment more recently. So everything from kind of carbon tracking your spending, I think is something from a consumer perspective that people find really interesting, as well as the social side and kind of purpose-driven fintech, and being able to say how much of your spending has gone to maybe small independent companies, or trying to have more targeted approach to encouraging spending with particular organizations and things like that. So I think it is an earlier stage when new ideas that are very much welcome. But I definitely think this idea of kind of carbon tracking, kind of social fintech that enables people to spend money in more targeted ways. There's a lot of innovation happening there.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that question, Muthu, and for that answer, Mary, as well. It's something that I see more and more whenever I'm looking at, weighing up some of these investment apps or whatnot. There's always now an option that covers ESG. So I think it's definitely something that we'll just see more and more of as well. We'll take another question. This one's from Jason. I can give my thoughts on this one as well, but Jason was asking if there's a big demand for data scientists in the fintech domain.
I think it's a good question. I think definitely keen to hear your thoughts on this as well, Conor. But I think generally, a big part of what I'm passionate about is for people to recognize fintech, light tech. There's such a wide range of roles available. So both tech roles, so software engineers, product managers, and things like that, to non-tech roles as well. And I think data science is definitely a role that people are always looking for. People always say data is the new gold. So being able to utilize the data that they have available to them and really make kind of data-driven decisions, I think is something that all the fintechs that I see are really keen to do. So from that perspective, I would say definitely yes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't think there's an exception to the rule that every one of these businesses are making data-driven decisions. I think that, they probably wouldn't make it far off the ground if that wasn't the case, and that's probably true across all industries. So I think there's always going to be room for your general data and analytical people across all domains, but specifically data science. I think we're seeing a real boom in the demand for that across, whether it be basically a lot of the fintechs that we're seeing crop up. I think one of the issues is that finance is obviously a more regulated space than a lot of other areas. So there's that question about the black box thing, as in that can you just let an algorithm run wild without actually knowing what it's doing? You do kind of need to keep some sort of control over that. So I think that's still a question that's there. But even with that in mind, data scientists are in huge demand is the very brief answer to that role, to that question. Do you have any insights in, maybe more generally, Mary, about the Millennial Gen Z workforce? I know you do a lot of work on your website and online and blogging, and you must get a lot of insight around kind of what it's like to be a millennial, a Gen Z, some of the problems and struggles, and maybe advice on, if someone wants to make a career in fintech, some advice on how to do that.
Yeah, sure. Definitely aware I'm about to speak on behalf of all Gen Z and millennials. So take what I say with a pinch of salt, and definitely ask the Gen Z closest to you as well. But I definitely think it's really interesting trends. I guess if I were to generalize, I think especially from a Gen Z perspective, I think the idea of kind of being more purpose driven, really wanting to associate your identity with things that you resonate with. So both in terms of where you're spending your money, the companies that you believe in, being really mission focused. I think it's something that I would say that a lot of Gen Z and millennials I speak to resonate with. As I mentioned at the start, I also run a network for female millennials called the Now You're Talking Network. And we released a white paper report for International Women's Day on the 8th of March. And that covered confidence at work, perceptions at work, side hustles, and just how people have been navigating the pandemic, having spoken to 100 Gen Z and millennials. And I think the key things that came out of that was definitely some level of anxiety around the pandemic and kind of losing a year of just like your prime time and being able to kind of build your network and build your career really. So my advice to anyone listening that is really interested in getting into fintech or tech more generally is, firstly, just tell people you want to get into the space. So many organizations and fintechs that I speak to want to support getting diverse people, young people into their organization. So it's really good to just kind of be bold and tell people that you're looking for work and what kind of work you're looking for. But also I often say, like, you can start a career before you have a job. So whether that's kind of taking online courses online, watching YouTube videos at the University of YouTube, or writing about fintech and what you see, no one can challenge you on your own opinion and perception of things. So really, I would encourage you to just think about ways that you can learn and document that learning. And you don't even have to necessarily share it, but just to be comfortable kind of owning your opinion and showcasing that with others.
Absolutely. Just as a reminder or note to anyone who's maybe just joined us and who hasn't been with us from the beginning. So we've got Mary Agbesanwa here with us. She's from PwC. She's basically doing a lot of work with fintechs, consulting fintechs, working towards operational excellence. I mean, she's spoken about a lot of different things already, from the UK FinTech Week to kind of some of the FinTech Accelerator programs she's running at PwC. Just a reminder as well that if you do have any questions, there should be a little somewhere you can pop them in on the bottom or the bottom right of the page there. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. We've covered a few off, which were great to see already. Moving forward from that, Mary, I think one of the things I always, just on the back of that last question I asked and that you answered, was around like how to get ahead in terms of your career, and this can be in fintech or in any career. And one of the things I always say to candidates, whether like if they're kind of junior candidates, maybe fresh grads or analysts, like, you need to get out there, go to events, get networking, meet people. That can help so much. But I kind of feel sorry for some kind of fresh grads now, where you can't really go anywhere. You can't. It's a lot more limited in terms of what you can do to maybe go and meet people. In terms of networking. Do you have any advice on maybe how to work around that, or if not, any kind of events that you run, anything online, any events or networking opportunities for people?
Yes, for sure. I would say I completely resonate with what you share, that I think virtual networking is definitely alive and kicking, and it is different from what we were used to before, kind of in-person networking events and things like that. But I would say, just as with in-person networking, virtual networking or digital networking needs a strategy. So whether it is creating a LinkedIn profile or Twitter account, definitely trying to be intentional with who you want to network with, what you want to be known for. So being quite methodical and engaging with maybe existing content or producing your own. So I guess the easiest tip I give people is just to keep an updated digital presence, whether you're interviewing or meeting clients. They're probably going to Google you. They're probably going to try and find your LinkedIn profile, not in a stalkery kind of way, but actually just out of kind of being inquisitive and wanting to see a bit more about what you do, a bit more about your personality. So really kind of try and keep your digital presence up to date. And I always say the more you do that, the more opportunities that will probably come your way, whether it's kind of speaking at events or kind of awards or so many different things. So people want to connect with people with like-minded interests as well. I would also say it's good to be intentional about building new relationships, and there's so many technology tools that enable us to do that even easier. So everyone's probably heard of Clubhouse, which is the new kind of social audio platform that a lot of people are using to kind of connect and meet with people and discuss interesting topics. There's also Lunch Club, which uses like AI to match you to interesting people with similar interests from a professional perspective as well. So I would really encourage you to use that kind of technology, LinkedIn, and I guess reaching out to people with clear intentions and people that you think you might have a similar interest with as well. And also just easing yourself into it, like whether it's you just set yourself a goal. I want to post once a week on LinkedIn. I want to tweet once a day. I want to retweet once a day. Those kind of small goals can make it feel less daunting, because I think the whole idea of building a personal brand or networking can feel like this big beast, but really it's stuff we do naturally, kind of building relationships, getting to know people, and also cultivate the existing relationships that you have already. Reminding yourself to just check in on people. It is a pandemic after all, so just making sure that you're kind of checking in on people, how they're doing. And that doesn't need to be too onerous. It can be sending them reports or articles that you've read that you find interesting. It can be commenting on their posts and things like that as well.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. And I like that one about keeping it kind of realistic little targets, whether that's a post on LinkedIn, one relevant post a week, and you can kind of take your time and make sure you're posting something that is relevant and adds value to the conversation. But it's something tangible, but really, really kind of manageable for people. A related question here. This one's from Victor. Thanks for asking, Victor. He's asking, what's the best way to document your learning? He may be asking, what's the best way? Do you put this on your CV, on your LinkedIn, or I'm not sure if you have another interpretation of the question yourself, Mary.
Yes. So in terms of, it's a really interesting question. I guess things that I do personally, I think it's really good to keep like an achievements list. So I keep a spreadsheet because, I mean, who doesn't love a spreadsheet of things that I've done that just help me. So anything that is kind of big, like awards and stuff like that, to small achievements on an annual basis, just so I can be grateful for the things that I'm achieving. And I think even more so working from home, kind of just being able to kind of document things that you're doing that you're proud of, I found to be really useful. So nothing more than just like a date, a description of what the achievement is, and something that you can look back at and really see your progress, because often we're quite myopic and kind of forget things that we've done that are really amazing. So I think that's a great way to document your learnings. But I really agree with what you were saying, Conor, like utilizing your LinkedIn as a gallery of your achievements as well. So posts, pictures, qualifications that you have, the more detail the better. I think that can be a really good way. I also probably a few years ago created a personal website, so I think that's a really good way that I find to document my learnings and achievements and goals as well. So if that's something you want to do, I'd really encourage it, and it's a really great way for you to kind of tell a bit more about yourself beyond just the company that you work at, or bring to life some of your personality as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Victor.
Nice. I was going to provide the plug to your website there, but it sounds like you've done it yourself. So
Done.
no, but I did visit on there. There's so many good resources for learning and for tracking that type of thing. There's definitely anyone who's listening, check it out. And Mary, you can provide the link. I'm not sure. I don't know it off by heart.
Yeah, it's literally just Agbesanwa.com.
Nice. I have another question here from Stephanie. Again, this might be one that I'm better suited to answer. She was asking if we expect to see a spike in available roles in FinTech coming over the next 12 months as a direct result of COVID-19. I think 100%. Even right now, we are, my team is as busy as we've been in at least probably 3 years. Some of that is coming from the challengers and the lenders that were maybe there before, but a lot of it is coming from the FinTech space. It feels like they were just waiting for, it kind of feels like a spring coil. They're just kind of gearing up for growth and ready to go. So no doubt if you're looking to maybe change roles, if you've got experience specifically for Harnham within data and analytics, which is where we focus, you can send your CV to info@harnham.com. We'll get someone to review that and give you a call to discuss potential opportunities. But certainly there's going to be, I mean, the market's just very busy at the moment. I'm sure you're probably seeing the same thing, Mary.
Yes, I would say anecdotally from the FinTechs that I speak to as well, hiring is always a challenge and an issue, and something that, especially growing FinTechs after raising money, that's something that's on their radar for sure.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about, I think you mentioned it a few times, kind of multicultural workspace, diversity and inclusion. Are you doing any work? Is it at PwC, or kind of have any insights yourself into what businesses are doing in that space and how that's so important?
Yes. So I co-chair our Multicultural Business Network, which is one of our employee resource groups. We have 11 that focus on, really bringing our people together. So we have 22,000 employees in the UK, and we focus on celebrating the multiculturalism of our UK firm. So we have people from over 120 different nationalities. And then obviously we're an advisory firm, so we work with so many different clients. So recognizing the benefits and sometimes challenges of working in diverse teams is something we're very accustomed to talking about and really want to celebrate as well. So within the Multicultural Business Network, we put on kind of events and campaigns. We've been running something called Color Brave for quite a while, since about 2016, 2017, which is all about normalizing conversations about race in the workplace. There's an amazing TED Talk by Melody Hobson, who is the CEO of Ariel Investments, which talks about being color brave as opposed to color blind. So I'd really encourage, if you haven't seen that TED Talk, to check it out. But we've been using that as a way to think about how we talk about and normalize conversations about race in the workplace as well. And for me, I think, especially after the events of last year, with the Black Lives Matter movement, the more recent events we've had with kind of anti-Asian hate as well, it is very exhausting to talk about things like this in the middle of a kind of pandemic as well. So I've been really pleased to see a lot of companies say that outright that they're like anti-racist, that they don't condone racist behavior. But I think it's going beyond that and just not just sharing that from a marketing and communications perspective, but really thinking about what you're doing internally to support your staff, and also thinking about how diversity and inclusion intersects with your business as a whole. So whether that's hiring, research and development into relation to building products and services, technology, as you mentioned earlier, Conor, in relation to like AI or machine learning, or supply chain. So how can you work with Black businesses or Black social enterprises as well? So I'm really excited for enough of the talking and more action, and really people thinking about, okay, how can I think about a D&I lens in the work that I do?
Yeah, sure. I think I came across a survey recently, and it said that 87% of global enterprises listed diversity and inclusion as an organization, as a priority for the business. It just shows how important it is. But I think what you said there is so important, Mary, about it's fine ticking a box to say it's important, but actually, what are you doing to to combat that? What initiatives are you running? Because if you're not proactive about this, you basically are just kind of you're talking the talk, but you're not actually doing the business, which is obviously what we need to end. We need to actually get into action here. So it's great to see. I know PwC have some initiatives. We have a lot of initiatives here as well. There's like, if you actually search the market, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that you can get involved with. One of our partners is called Into Science, and essentially what they do is they're an organization that encourages kids from underrepresented groups and disadvantaged backgrounds to get into STEM degrees, which is kind of trying to solve the problem at the source, which is really interesting. But yeah, and I think that in the space that I work in or recruit in, risk analytics, we do Harnham do every year a kind of diversity and inclusion guide that paints a picture of what that looks like, specifically in the data space and analytics space. I think in risk, in my realm, 31% of people are women, which is up a percent from last year. So hopefully things are slowly going in the right direction there. But it's a really interesting point you made about unconscious bias as well, about even how that can seep into our algorithms when it comes to candidate selection, or basically any decisions that we're making. Another thing that I kind of wanted to touch upon was the kind of working from home and what that looks like, and even specifically for Gen Z and millennials. Like, a lot of people find that challenging, and if there's any kind of strategies or ideas for young people to, I suppose, stay clear of the distractions and work productively from home. I saw in the news that PwC had a kind of new initiative on that front recently.
Yes. So in terms of our new deal, which is what we're calling it, yeah, it's really exciting. And I think it basically encompasses how going forward we're going to have this hybrid working model. And it aligns with our kind of net zero commitment by 2030 as well. And what it consists of is really three things. So in July and August during the summer, we'll have half-day Fridays, which is quite nice. And then going forward, we'll be doing 2 or 3 days in the office or at client site, which again is kind of giving people that option to work from home for basically half the week if they wish as well. And then we also have an empowered day each week where you can decide to kind of, if you wish, to start early and finish earlier as well. So I think it's really exciting. I hope more businesses will be going in this direction as well. Not only are there potential kind of cost savings, but in some ways, the COVID pandemic has been basically a mass experiment for kind of the future of work and working from home, and showcasing that actually people can work in their home environments if they're able to do so. And I think most people, some people I talk to really like it, some people don't like it and want that kind of separation between home and work. But on the whole, I think most people appreciate having the option. And it's really exciting that we're kind of championing this and going through it. In terms of any tips for people, hopefully we've found kind of some tips now that we've been doing this for a year. But things that have worked for me, I would say having a clear kind of morning routine, being quite aware of my energy that day. So sometimes I feel more creative. Sometimes I feel like I definitely need a cup of coffee and maybe need to just zone out and focus on emails for a bit. So kind of being aware of how to manage your energy accordingly. Not setting meetings back to back 5 days a week is definitely helpful, I think, for everyone, because we definitely need that thinking time. And then personally, I just try and set 3 non-negotiables every single day. So at the start of a day, what are the 3 things that I really want to get done? And obviously, usually the list could be 20 things, but just by setting 3, it gives me kind of that focus of the things that I want to focus on and hopefully definitely get done. And then there'll be like the nice to haves, the less of a focus, because in this world that we live in, where there's kind of like LinkedIn messages, Slack messages, Google Chat, Google Meet, Zoom, it's a lot of information. So being able to kind of focus and understand what you want to get out of your day is really important.
100%. Interesting you call COVID a mass experiment. I've not seen that before, but yeah, I wish, if only. But it is an interesting way of putting it, or not nice way of putting it. But yeah, we have just a reminder to anyone who's maybe joined us recently. We're going to have a couple more questions before logging off. So if you do have a question, you can pop it in down below. And basically, we've got Mary on with us, who is our FinTech consultant, FinTech guru for PwC. So we have another question from Muthu here. Thanks for staying with us, Muthu. Muthu asked, the pandemic is aggressively pushing digital adoption. How are banks adapting to this all the while when neobanks are growing rapidly? Would you say that the fundamental way of doing business by retail banks is changing? Great question, Muthu.
Yeah, wow. What would I say to that? I think change is happening faster. Definitely, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. So from a fintech perspective, I think some of the fintechs have done really well, but I definitely think profitability is still an issue. Customer acquisition costs can be quite high for them as well. So you see a lot of the fintechs advertising on the tube or like around, and the kind of the marketing push has to be there as well. But they have some advantages in terms of they don't have the overhead costs and the operational costs of having branches. But then they have other costs, like in terms of being able to offer the 24/7 customer service and things like that as well. So I think there's pros and cons to their business models. I definitely think they've driven change in terms of financial services generally. So I don't think anyone can say that also their incumbent bank and the way their incumbent bank online experience hasn't changed in the past couple of years as well. So they're definitely trying to catch up. I think some recent interesting statistics are, I guess in the UK, 12% of people use only digital or neobanks. So there is a lot of people that are passionate about the space, but still maybe use incumbent banks as well. So the idea that there's still some trust and a kind of perception gap to go as well is something quite interesting as well. And especially if people have larger amounts of money, they might not be using digital banks, because I guess these traditional banks have built their trust and brand perception over decades and hundreds of years, really. And I would also say, like, another stat was that there's been a 72% rise in the use of apps related to financial services across Europe due to the pandemic. So I think the consumer preferences have also changed. So people are really normalizing the fact that the branch isn't open. Using online banking is something that everyone has had to become a bit more upskilled in, but also the challenges this presents in terms of cybersecurity and fraud and unfortunate things happening about that we're always reading about in the media as well. So as well as like the KYC and kind of checking people's background. So it's definitely an evolving space. I'm more bullish working in this space. I do think experiences are changing for customers, but it takes time. And I think there are definitely pros and cons and things to watch out for as well.
Sure. I think you mentioned the profitability challenge, and I know you said you do a lot of kind of B2B, and certainly we see with the B2Cs, like the Monzos and that, huge challenge of profitability there, and it's all about customer growth, and profitability has to take a back seat for a while. Is it the same in the B2B space, or is that less of a challenge, do you see?
It's a very interesting question. I think similar challenge in different ways. So when it comes to kind of enterprise solutions, that is really about kind of the business development and the clients that you have that will help you basically secure your that you really want to attract. But I guess these are particularly the fintechs that we work with are the ones that are aiming to work with larger financial institutions. So through our accelerator, for instance, the key thing that I think the fintechs want to get out of it is that connection to larger financial institutions, particularly the key decision makers and budget holders at these organizations. Because the challenge is you might know one person in that organization, but to navigate who exactly you want to be telling, because you want to have an internal advocate in that organization. And you also want to know what your true value proposition is and what exactly is the differentiator of your technology. And it's very common for a lot of these organizations to speak to 60 companies, but only actually give a proof of concept or pilot to like a few. So I think it's just as competitive, if you want to call it that. But really being very clear about what problem you solve is so important. And that's what we really love doing, finding those interesting, innovative fintechs that are kind of early stage-ish, but definitely revenue generating, and connecting them to corporates through our program as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think the good news is there is still a lot of problems to solve in the financial space. So I still think there's so much more room for innovation. And no doubt we've kind of maybe seen tip of the iceberg when it comes to what actually, what changes we'll see over the next 5-10 years or whatnot. But I think that we've taken enough of your time, Mary. Really appreciate you coming on. I hope some of our listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. It was really fantastic bringing you on and hearing about some of the initiatives both at PwC and with yourself personally. So yeah, we really appreciate your time. And everyone who's listening from your sitting rooms and sofas and home workspaces, thanks very much. And if you keep tuned on Harnham, you'll probably see another few live sessions coming up soon.
Amazing.